Welcome to In the News for December the 6th, 2024. I am Brett Burney from appsandlaw.com.
And this is Jeff Richardson from iPhone JD. Hey, Brett.
Good morning, Jeff. It's good to talk with you, as always, even on a little bit of a perturbing story that came out this week. We often talk about like security fixes for iPhone, or that Apple is releasing some security upgrades, but this didn't come from Apple. There was the FBI, the National Security Agency, and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency did a warning to basically all Americans this past week to say, try not to use regular text messaging. Okay, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, Jeff, and you could do a better job here. But I had several folks, I'm sure just like you, send me this story and be like, oh my goodness, am I not supposed to use text messages anymore? The government is telling me I got to stop. What is going on here?
Yeah, it's funny how sometimes you have these security issues that you and I might talk about in the podcast, but most people don't know about it. And then you have these things which, for darn good reason I had so many people sending me emails about this because they just know I'm into technology and stuff like that. But, I think it's justified. I mean, as some of the quotes I put in here, Senator Mark Warner said it's, the most serious hack, to our telecommunications industry ever. And what's interesting is, although there's a certain degree of alarm because this just came out and it's made news this week, the reality is that what they have uncovered is something that this, organization that is associated with the Chinese government. I mean, Chinese government, of course, denies their involvement, which is what you would expect. But,
right.
And again, I don't mean to say too much about it because you know that the U.S. spies in other countries too. But the reality is that this Chinese hacking organization has been doing this for over a year. It's just that they only discovered it now. And what's really scary about it is that even though it's just been discovered, they say that to fix it, it's going to revolve, fixing individual routers that are used around the country by AT&T and Verizon and the other companies, and that would, how long would that take? Because it's replacing individual hardware. It reminds me of when Delta Airlines had that issue earlier this year from the hack, that they had to upgrade every terminal, it just takes forever to do that. So so it's a huge hack. So the breadth of this and the danger is just alarming. Now, do individuals need to be concerned about not texting and stuff? The problem is that China was obviously trying to get into, all the communications so that they could, gather whatever, interesting intelligence that they can get from chat messages. There has, from what I understand from the report that was on the federal website, the CISA website, they said they had already figured out at least 100 people that had been, they think, specifically targeted, many of them in the Washington, D.C. area. You can probably imagine who some of these people were. They did mention that, for example, it included, for example, Trump and Kamala Harris. I mean, not that it was a specific election thing. It's just people that they considered to be more important. They tried to target the phones of them and the people around them. But again, who knows how far this thing went? I mean, I think that's just, it could have gone everywhere. But what the key here is that what they're doing is, text messages, SMS messages, the old style messages. That's the stuff that's completely unencrypted. It's been around since forever. And so as long as you can get into that network, if you can place a hack on any router that's along the chain of the telecommunications network, well, then things that are plain text, of course, you could see them. And so they could see the plain text, and frankly, even voice communications that were not encrypted, they could listen to them as well. I mean, it sort of makes sense. It's, it's not much more than just standing outside somebody's office and listening to what they say. So that's easy, low-hanging fruit. And so what the government has suggested is to protect yourself if you want to make sure that your communications are not interpreted. And again, many of us don't consider ourselves huge targets, but at the same time, as a lawyer, I mean, I don't really communicate with my clients via text for a number of reasons, but were I to do so, that would be, I might have confidential attorney-client privilege. You could have HIPAA medical secrets in there. You never know. And so you would not necessarily want to have those communications, but if you were going to do it, you want it to be encrypted. And the thing to look out for is end-to-end encryption, which people sometimes abbreviate as E2EE. But what it means is that from the time that you type something on your device, it is encrypted on your device. So as it goes from your device to AT&T or Verizon or whoever else, it's encrypted the whole way up. It's encrypted the entire time it's through that system, and then it's encrypted down to the other side. And unless you have all three parts of that, the end-to-end encryption, there's going to be a vulnerability along the way. And so Apple has always designed its iMessage system, which we use in the Messages app, to be that way from day one, and
Right.
FaceTime too.
Right.
So, FaceTime communications, using the Messages app for your blue bubble communications with other iPhone users,
Right.
that's all
Right.
encrypted. So, even if the hackers were to get into it, all they would get is a bunch of meaningless ones and zeros that they could not de-encrypt and turn into what you're doing. The danger, however, is first of all the plain text stuff. Second of all, the big thing on Android phones is they have this standard that Google has been pushing called RCS that
Yeah.
it allows you to have more iMessage-like features for non-iMessage. Things like, how when someone's typing, you see the three dots that they're about to type something and they're about to send it to you. RCS has that. So you can see that, and RCS supports sending bigger pictures and bigger videos and a lot of those rich media things. But one of the things that RCS in theory can support is end-to-end encryption. But the way it's implemented is it really doesn't have it with except for a few like certain apps on Android phones. If you're communicating
Mm-hmm.
with the people that use the same app, they get it. But the bigger universe of Android users don't have it. Plus, any Android to
Yeah.
iPhone and iPhone to Android communications, even if you use the new RCS standard, which just came out in iOS 18 a few months ago, this is brand new. Even though you can get some of the features like better pictures and better videos and the dots when you're typing, it doesn't have end-to-end encryption.
Emojis.
So
Yeah.
emojis and stuff. So, again, I don't know how much regular people need to be concerned about it because you have to assume that unless you're a really important person, you're not a target. But at the same time, I'm sure that they're doing sweeps where they just pull up all sorts of information. And once the information is
Yeah, why
found by
not?
one set of hackers, another could get it, and then it could end up on the dark web. And, it just, you and I have recommended to people for years and years and years use encrypted communications just because you never know why it might matter. And so this is just, in some ways, it's a
Right.
big story, but
Right.
it's just another example of it. And there are third-party apps too that have it. And I haven't investigated the full extent of it. I know that a lot of people around the world use WhatsApp, and I think that there's a certain
That's right.
degree of
That's right.
of end-to-end encryption there. There are other ones that perhaps don't have it as well. I don't know the latest on WhatsApp, Signal, all of those as to what their security is and isn't. But I do know that from day one, Apple has had it. And this gets to a bigger picture too, which is we often
Yep.
talk about one of the differences between Apple and some of its competitors, most notably Google, is that Apple tells people, we're concerned about your privacy, right? And privacy is not only that we're not going to sell your information, but it's also that we respect the confidentiality of things, which means from day one, when their products are designed, they make them encrypted and private. And Apple has the luxury of doing that because they don't make, with
Yes.
minor exceptions, they don't make money off of selling your personal information. Google, on the other hand, they are an advertising company. That's where they get all their money, through ads. And so the reason that the Google website is free, the reason that Android exists is so that they can, use information. And again, not that they're evil or anything like that. It's just that they have a different mindset and they're not going to always be
Right.
privacy and encryption oriented from day one. And I think that's just a decision that you make of, do you want the openness of Android, which means sometimes you get to try out new features before they would ever come to the iPhone, or do you want
Right.
the security
Right.
of the Apple ecosystem? And you can tell from my bias which way I lean, but I mean there's choices out there. So it's an interesting story to me because of this particular hack, which is
Yeah.
nasty
Yeah.
and big, but also because of the bigger picture of just reminding people. And hey, if this story getting all this news attention, like you were talking about, Brett, if it results in more people understanding
Exactly.
what it means
Exactly.
to
Or being
be
aware.
end-to-end
Yeah.
encrypted, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, just a little more background on this. The group, this hacking group, at least it's been identified. It's called Salt Typhoon, or I think that came from Microsoft or somewhere that they're calling it Salt Typhoon. And I just want to go back and underscore what you said quickly, that where this is coming from is based on the short messaging service, SMS, which has been around since I think the early 90s, right? This is when, before the iPhone, when we had those little candy bar phones and we didn't even have a full keyboard, right? We had the dial
Right.
pad and you had the three letters on the dial pad and you were like typing out text messages in that way. That's how old this standard is, which tells you that it works and has continued to work over all of these devices over all these years. And so I was just thinking this when I was listening to you talk about this too quickly, Jeff, is that one of the reasons that I think that if you are going maybe iPhone to Android or to even other quote dumb phones or other places, it's like that standard has to be a lowest common denominator, right? That may not be as secure as what more modern day standards or protocols could be. And so that is what really this is focusing on here. And it's like you said, it's a low hanging fruit for anybody. I mean, that's just like we tell people don't go to Starbucks and use an open Wi-Fi and not use a VPN or something, right? I mean, that's just a very simple thing because anybody could be sniffing packets of data, that kind of a thing. And so it's folks that might be using some of these those aspects. And then the last thing quickly I just wanted to say is that you're right. If you're going iPhone to iPhone, again, there shouldn't be an issue. I remember listening to a cybersecurity professional a couple of years ago, I think at the ABA Tech Show, Jeff, where they were just saying this, iMessages, iPhone to iPhone is the most secure messaging component just because of the way that Apple has, initiated all of that. And another thing quickly is Apple takes care of the software and the hardware on the iPhone side. Now, that doesn't solve all the issues, but to your point that I was saying, there's many companies that make Android devices. And again, you have to go to that low common denominator so that everybody can communicate on that aspect. And people just would rather that it work as opposed to having to jump through additional security hoops. That's that constant battle between security and convenience all the time on there. So all that to say, again, using something like iMessage, using even WhatsApp. I mean, the rest of the world pretty much standardizes on WhatsApp. I think you mentioned that too. And that is a perfect example, or another app like Signal or Telegram or some of these other apps that are out there that people will use simply because they know that it has that additional security component on there.
I'll mention one more thing too. Not that, I'm terribly concerned if I pick up the phone and I, call my dad or something like that. Is the country of China going to be all that interested in listening to us talk about, what we're doing this weekend? Probably not. But keep in mind that when you do use your phone, not for texting, but just for voice, you have an alternative. You can use the regular talking, methods, or you could use like FaceTime audio. And I very few people do that, but I will encourage, especially if you're talking to someone that's maybe a little more tech savvy, that it's not going to throw them out. I'm not talking about FaceTime video. I'm not talking about seeing each other and having a video conference.
Yeah,
that's fun
just
too.
The audio.
But don't forget about FaceTime audio, because first of all, it's encrypted, so it solves this problem. Second of all, I find that the quality of the audio typically sounds much, much better when you have a FaceTime audio conversation as opposed to using the cell phone, type signals. So just something to keep in mind. I mean, if there's someone that, if both of y'all are savvy enough to understand what it means to have an incoming FaceTime audio call, it's a call just like any other call, but it sounds better. And it's more secure. It's got more encryption and stuff. It's just something to throw in mind.
And that even works on Wi-Fi, right? You could be on your cell data, or it could be on Wi-Fi. So there's a couple of extra options there.
One good reason to use it is sometimes you'll be in a situation where the cell phone data is really poor because you're at the bottom of the building, or you're in a dead zone. But if you have Wi-Fi access, you're golden. There are parts of the country that don't have great cell signals, or maybe they have good Verizon and you have AT&T, or vice versa. But as long as you have internet access, you can communicate, using that through FaceTime audio. So don't forget about FaceTime audio.
Just the last thing here, just that you said at the end of one of your comments, the awareness factor. Like if this pushes a few more people to be able to say, are there other ways? Are there other ways to communicate? Exactly what you were just talking about, FaceTime audio. That's an excellent option there. Now, of course, that's only iPhone to iPhone. It's not going to work if you're calling somebody with an Android, but maybe use something, maybe a Zoom call, or maybe, even WhatsApp. You can do a voice call that way as well. Anyway, just some other options, and I think that that's really good. Another story that you linked to today is in a similar vein. I thought it was good, from the Wall Street Journal, the iPhone's lockdown mode. Now, we've talked about this. It's fairly new, but I just kind of like the comment that I think was from Amnesty International, right? I think they were kind of interviewing some of the folks there, and just again another good reminder that the iPhone does have this lockdown mode. So in situations where you might need to just be a little bit more careful on the security side, this is another good option.
Yeah. If you are suddenly find yourself to be a public official that is in the news, or if you are working for some organization that might be targeted by a foreign government, or, if you know that you're in a situation where, wow, there's a real chance that someone could be trying to intercept my communications, you can turn on lockdown mode. It makes your iPhone a lot more limited. but it does give you just this incredible sense of security. Every time you go to load a website, it's not going to load a whole bunch of stuff by default, and so things are going to look different. It's more to go around. There's more interference in your communications and what calls are accepted and everything else, what text messages are accepted, but it's the most security that Apple can offer you. So, if you want to give it a try, it's disruptive to try it, but if you're in a situation where you think that you need it, just something to keep in mind that it's there. I've personally looked into it in the past, and when I saw all the disadvantages and downsides and how it limited my use of the phone, I'm like, this is not, I'm not doing important enough stuff that I think I'm enough of a target to turn it on. But it is nice to know it's out there. And I mean, also, I love the idea that Apple is working on this super secure lockdown mode, which they do improve over time. And, eventually those features, some of them will trickle down into those that are regular folks. And, it helps everybody to have Apple working on that super, super level of security.
I found that if you just go into settings, you go to your privacy section of the settings, you'll see the lockdown mode option there. And as Apple is usually good to do, when you go in there, you have the toggle to say turn on lockdown mode. But before you do that, there's a learn more link, and it goes right to the Apple support website there, that it shows you exactly what's going to be turned off. Or, you were talking about like if you become a public official, but one of the things I always think about is if you're traveling through a country or a place that may not be as friendly, maybe that could be a temporary way, just to make sure that things are locked down or, a little more secure, that kind of a thing. Anyway, just go and read about it because, like, again, just at the last point that we made before, just an awareness component on there. And I don't remember when this came in. I think it's maybe within the last 2 or 3 years, this lockdown mode, but it's just good to know that it's there and available. We like talking about Tim Cook, and I like the fact that Wired magazine did a fantastic profile on him. I might have to see if I can get into this and show this, but I would like for you to talk about this because it's the interviewer that is interesting, Stephen Levy, who's been around for 30, 40 something years, right? As a technology reporter, has written some amazing stuff over the years. And just the fact that somebody like Stephen was able to get full access to somebody like Tim Cook, there's just some really good nuggets in this story. I'm glad that you linked to it today.
Yeah, Stephen Levy is a fantastic reporter. He's been covering the tech industry for 40 years. I mean, he's interviewed Steve Jobs as much as anybody, and he's just been very plugged into the Apple beat for a very long time. So he really knows his stuff. So he's a great person to write the article. And what I liked about it is it wasn't just on one topic; it was on a whole host of topics. So I picked out some of the nuggets that I put in my in the news post. There's a couple more that I didn't actually identify that I wanted to talk about with you, but just to go through some of the things. I mean, they started off by talking about AI because it is really the top of mind topic for people. Not only because Apple is, Apple itself is very interesting. They just started to release Apple Intelligence. We have more features coming soon. I think literally next week, Brett, is my guess. We're going to see, what are we on? We're in iOS 18, so it'll be 18.3. Am I right with my numbers there? But the next update to the iOS I expect to come out probably.
Well, 18.2 is
I'm sorry, it'll be 18.2. That's right, because we're on 0.1 right now. It'll be the third. It was 18.0, then 0.1. This will 0.2.
But three's coming soon, I'm sure.
Well, 3 after that. But my guess is it's going to come out on Monday or Tuesday, and it's going to have the next wave of Apple Intelligence features, including the ability to help you with writing and stuff like that. So that will be interesting. So he starts by talking to Tim Cook about that. People think that maybe Apple is behind some other folks. And, I've mentioned this in the past. They are, quote unquote, behind in that companies like OpenAI with ChatGPT and Google and some other companies, Anthropic with its what's the one, Claude. There are other things that are out there that are more advanced than what Apple is showing right now. However, Apple is very rarely the first one to come out with something. There's so many examples of that. There were MP3 players before the iPods. There were smartphones before the iPhone. There were all these examples. There were people that tried versions of tablets before the iPad. But then Apple comes in and sort of they do it right, and they do it in a way that everybody else is like, oh, That's how we should do this. And, we always joke about how smartphones before the iPhone had all these different looks to it. Many of them look more like a BlackBerry with the keyboards and stuff. And then Apple comes out with the iPhone, and suddenly all the other smartphones in the world are like, oh, yeah, that's what they should look like. It's like, okay, guys,
Yeah,
so
and they
much
look
for
like an iPhone
creativity.
now.
You're just going to
Right.
copy Apple. But so the question is will Apple, I mean, it doesn't always work that way, but will it work that way when Apple enters AI? This is not a hardware thing, it's more of a software thing, but Apple's approach, where instead of having everything on the cloud, you instead take advantage of the processors, the incredibly good processors that you have on device, which is it's got all of these savings, and it's faster, it's distributed, it's more private because you're so much of the queries are being handled on device, and those that can't be handled on device are handled through
Yeah.
that very secure private cloud. So it's got all of those advantages to it. So anyway, that was interesting to hear him talk about that, and he even asked Tim Cook what Tim himself uses of Apple Intelligence, and he said that he likes the way he can sort of summarize a bunch of emails and stuff. I personally have mixed experiences with the summarization of emails feature, but I do
Yeah.
know that
Yeah.
that is going to get better over time because it's the sort of the low-hanging fruit of AI. So that was the AI. One more thing that was interesting about AI was this comment of, if you have AI draft something, is that cheating? Is that really you? There's that commercial that's on TV that's a little controversial where this guy who's the biggest doofus in his office ends up writing a letter and then
Right.
has the Apple AI improve it and sends it to his boss, and his boss thinks he's so smart. And some people, I thought the commercial was funny. Some people said that the commercial it makes it seem like AI is just made for
Right.
people that are idiots. I understand that too, but as Tim Cook points out, I mean, the fact that a musician uses something like Logic Pro, or the fact that you use a word processor instead of typing everything by manually in a
Right.
typewriter and figuring out yourself where
Right.
to hit the returns as opposed to the computer, the word processor. These are all just tools, and you're still ultimately the author. And there's a distinction between using tools to their advantage. And frankly, given how AI is going to become bigger in the future, I want people to know how to use AI. I want people in my own office to know how to use it so they can take advantage of it. So anyway, that's enough
I
about the
think
AI stuff.
I think
Anything
right
else that
after
jumped out at
that,
you on that?
yeah, right after that, Stephen made the comment. He goes, the counter argument though is that in the early days of the internet, people complained that no one bothered to memorize dates because they can just Google it, right? They don't need to memorize anything. And something about he's like Tim was like that is similar to people had a fear the calculator would fundamentally erode people's math ability. And Stephen
Exactly.
Levy says, I used to know how to do long division, but I don't do that anymore. And Tim responds, I haven't forgotten. So good. We know that Tim Cook at least can still do long division. But anyway, it was a good point. And I thought this was just a great back and forth here because it seemed like in one part here that we're talking about, Stephen was like, well, that's really convenient that AI can stand for Apple Intelligence. And Tim was kind of like, no, that's not what we were trying to, we didn't think about that. It's nice that it kind of fit in there. But anyway, I mean, man, what kind of a silver platter could it be nicer that could have handled the Apple in there? Because I do think they are coming up with their own flavor. All that to underscore what you're saying, in the sense that the way that they're approaching it. I mean, I remember that interview, with Joanna Stern and Craig Federighi. Them just talking about like them being careful about it, them being precise and thinking about it as much as they do. I just thought that was good, but I feel like by this time, Tim Cook and other Apple executives are probably sick and tired of talking about answering AI questions. And like, hey, where's Apple going with this? You and I have talked about this a lot. I think we're just at the very tip of what's going to be. And I know we're a little impatient. We want to see things, but just because we've been around long enough, Jeff, that we've seen how other kind of waves have gone with Apple. I mean, they're going to start swooping in here, and it's going to be unique. I'm not going to say it's going to be the greatest thing, but it's certainly going to be unique and something that has an Apple stamp on it. What else in the story was good?
So one thing that jumped out at me on the Apple Vision Pro is, Stephen Levy mentioned that not many people have it, and Tim Cook says, well, it's an early adopter technology.
Right.
But the one thing that was interesting there is, a couple of months ago, you and I were talking on the podcast about how Meta, Facebook, had unveiled this thing called Orion, it looked much more like glasses, but it had the AI built into it. They were using it that looked like the Ray-Bans. And he point blank asks Tim Cook, is that the future? And Tim Cook said, you almost expect him to give sort of a non-answer answer. But he said,
Right.
"Oh yeah, I mean that I agree." And he said that that is probably where this is going. And so, right now the Apple Vision Pro, it's big and it's bulky, and although I enjoy using mine a lot, it's not something I would walk around in the street with it. But I mean, Tim admitted that what they are doing is working towards this technology that it'll be something like a pair of
Uh-huh.
glasses that you wear all
Right.
day long, every
Right.
day, and don't think about it.
Yeah.
It'll just have this augmented reality component of it. A big one reason that the Vision Pro is so much better than things like the Meta Quest and other VR headsets is that it has this display with these dots that are so close together that it looks incredible. It's like a really high quality display. And
Mm-hmm.
yet, the real ideal product in the future, it would not have a display to show at least the outside world, but instead it would just be see-through, much like your glasses. You could just see the outside world. Now, of course, you'd want
Yeah.
to have a nice display to put stuff on top of it. But anyway, it's just sort of interesting. But that was the thing that jumped out at me on the Vision Pro. This next one that I listed, it's not extraordinary because it's not alarming, it's not surprising, excuse me, and that we've seen it and heard it before. But when he talked to Apple, to Tim Cook about Apple's focus on medical technology, the Apple Watch, and now we have the hearing aids and the AirPod Pros and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that, Tim Cook, and he said this before, but he says, if you look in the future, at some point in the future, people are going to look back and say, what was Apple's biggest contribution? And he says, I think it's going to be in the health area. And this is something
Yeah.
that, if you
Yeah.
want to draw a distinction between the Steve Jobs Apple and the Tim Cook Apple, there are some
Mm.
big differences, but one of them is the Steve Jobs Apple, that was never a big focus. Maybe it just didn't have the technology for it at the time. But under Tim Cook's leadership, between what they've done with the watch and the AirPods and on iPhone device, health has been a big focus, and it's getting more and more. And so I just think that that was, nothing new, but interesting that that's continues to be the perspective he sees. And then the last thing I'll just throw out is that, Stephen Levy asks, we have the iPhone 16 next year, maybe we'll have the iPhone 17. Do you see an
Right.
iPhone 30 one day? Are we just going to keep having iPhones forever? And but Tim Cook says, yeah, we really do. I mean, not forever perhaps, but he says, I do see a long future for the iPhone because it really is such a nice form factor. And of course
Yeah.
it's going to evolve over time. But I, at least what he's saying publicly, and I think he probably believes it too, is that the iPhone is going to have a place for a long time. And that makes me feel good because my website's called iPhone JD. And so if the iPhone goes away, I got to change the website name. So I don't want to do, but anyway, I'm just joking. But
Never.
so anyway, so that was interesting things from the interview. I have a couple more things to say about it, but anything that I've missed in there that you wanted to jump on?
No, other than I just like at the very end here to talk to your question about Stephen asking Tim Cook about Apple's legacy, what it's going to be, and you were talking about the health, and I know that, but I feel like this is so Tim Cook, like
I
I
like
know
this,
him or
yeah.
something, but at the end what he really kind of hones in on, and yeah, I could see this could be a marketing ploy in a way, but I feel like what we have seen from Tim Cook, this is sincere. He goes, I got so many, they want to make products that people can feel. They feel it when they use the products, is what he said. I got so many messages when the hurricane hit in North Carolina and people discovered that they had the ability to SOS and to message people, even when the infrastructure was down. In other words,
Right.
we reported on this. We had a couple of stories, I remember, Jeff, that we
Right,
talked
right.
about, that people were able to call loved ones in different states and different areas because those text messages just barely could go over satellites, right? Or they could call they could call emergency services through the satellite, even if people didn't even know that their iPhone had that capability built in. But we know, just because Apple is good about doing this, that hundreds, thousands of people write into Apple and say, thank you, from the watch saved my life. I was able to lose 50 pounds by using the watch. But, even things like this, they know, or the AirPods, that the idea that people didn't even know that they could use the phone and it worked for them in a devastating scenario. It's just good. Like to your point about Steve Jobs' Apple versus Tim Cook's Apple. I mean, to me, that sort of epitomizes a little bit, I think, of where Tim Cook kind of leads in this area, and it's an Apple that I appreciate. I mean, nobody's perfect, but I just appreciate the fact that it seems like that's where Tim Cook, his heart and his mind is pointed. What's the last couple of things on this story?
Yeah, and that's that. Well, before I go on, just go back to that last paragraph you had up on your screen for a
Yeah.
second. But he has that sentence, and I know this is just a little, touchy feely, but I like how he says, I think Apple will be remembered for delivering great products that changed the
Yeah.
world, that really
Yeah.
improved people's lives. And,
Yep.
I guess we'd all like to say that, but I think he definitely believes that. So the last thing I was going to point out was just sort of a little bit of a meta issue. When I went to go read this article last night, and it happened to you just 5 minutes ago when you tried to pull it
Yep. It
online,
did.
I encountered some pop-up things and stuff that I thought that it was only for subscribers and I wasn't going to be able to read it because I don't currently subscribe to Wired magazine. But I'm like, back in the day when I used to get paper magazines back in the 90s and into the early 2000s,
Right.
Wired was one of the magazines. I remember when Wired
Mm-hmm.
first came out in the 1990s,
Same.
I subscribed to it because at the time it was a very revolutionary magazine in that it had big pages and big colors, and they
Yeah. It
used
was a big
layouts
magazine. Yeah.
that was unlike other. It was the graphic design was fantastic, and I read Wired that way for many, many, many years, and I loved it. I no longer subscribe. But when I was having trouble accessing the online version of this, I thought, oh, I wish I could just read the magazine version of this because I know it's the cover story. And so, sure enough, using the Flickster app, I was able to. It connects to my public library, and much like I could walk in the public library and read the magazine off the shelf, I was able to download the digital version of this entire issue and then read it that way. And that's the version that you were just showing a second ago was from that. But one of the differences is that when you have a print magazine, you only have so much space. But when you have an online article, you have unlimited space, right? And sure enough,
Yep.
it even says this here that this is an edited They always say that when they have interviews, this version's been edited.
Sure.
But there are some questions and answers that appear on the online version of this interview that are not in the magazine version, which I only know because I then went back and looked at it online. And so one of them was, and this is just sort of a funny question, but I love the Vision Pro, and you put it over and it changes everything that you see. And the question that Stephen Levy asks is, I heard that Stevie Wonder had a demo of the Vision Pro and loved it. How did that work?
What?
And what he's
Wait
obviously
a
asking
minute.
is, Stevie Wonder can't even see, and this is the Vision Pro. So how did it even work? And Tim gave this answer, which is really not much of an answer at all. He says he's a friend of Apple, and accessibility is always important to us, and so we wanted to get his feedback. But I wish that he had pushed on that because I'm curious. If somebody is blind, the Vision Pro, what feedback would you give? I mean, maybe it's colors and shapes if you could still have limited vision. Now, obviously, there's an audio component to the Vision Pro, and it's really good audio, but it's not different than just wearing AirPods Pro. So Stevie Wonder's impressions and suggestions for an AirPods Pro, I want to know about that. Right?
Yeah.
But his suggestions.
We need an interview of Stevie Wonder now. Stephen Levy, go interview Stevie Wonder.
But for the Vision Pro, I'm just really curious what thoughts he would have on the Vision Pro. So that was just sort of funny. But they cut that for space in the print version of it. And then
the print version, yeah.
There was a couple other things, but the one of them that jumped out at me that was on the online version and not the print version is they asked whether Apple used to do all these live keynote presentations when they had new products. And during COVID, they shifted to just doing the pre-recorded, release it online, and people would watch a video. And because it's pre-recorded, it's much tighter. There's no mistakes because they can re-record things, and it's just a lot more polished of an experience. And he asked Tim Cook, will Apple ever go back to live presentations? And Tim Cook says it just, basically we found that it really works to have these pre-recorded things. So many people are not physically at Apple. They have a couple hundred people there, but they have millions of people around the world that can watch it online. And so, although he did admit that he misses some of the vibe of that live experience, much like live theater versus a movie, but that, he's basically saying this is how it's going to be going forward, is they're going to have these pre-recorded ones. I personally don't mind them because since I'm never there in person anyway, and I do like the fact that when it's pre-recorded,
we like to watch it. Right.
It's denser, it's more intensive. They have interesting graphics that you could do as opposed to just having people standing on stage. So I actually think that they're more entertaining, and I'm happy that they do it this way. But I just thought it was an interesting question to ask. So anyway, as you can tell, and there's still other topics I didn't even discuss. There's a lot of fun stuff in this interview. It doesn't take very long to read, but I encourage you to look at it because I think he did a really nice job with the interview.
Well, we learned that Tim Cook can still do long division. I don't know that I can right now, but I like the fact that you lead to another story, Jeff, from Andrew Orr at AppleInsider, how to use Apple Notes for instant equation results. I know we've talked about this I think this is sort of the genesis of AI, even though people may not call it necessarily Apple Intelligence or AI.
I think it is, yeah.
But it is baked into this that in the Notes app that you can start writing an equation or even just a math problem, and the option here is like auto results or insert results, right? It'll automatically pop a result for you, even without you put in an equal sign or something on there, which is great.
Yeah. I wanted to mention this today because we had talked when iOS 18 came out a few months ago that if you're using an iPad with an Apple Pencil, you can, draw things. You can like handwrite 2 + 2 equals,
Right.
and from a visual, it will do that, and that's really cool too. That visual notes. But this article points out that you don't have to be using a stylus. I mean, you could just be using an iPad. You could just be using an iPhone and just typing the numbers. And if you start the equation and then you just follow his directions here for how you do the suggest results, it will actually do the math for you. And in some ways, that's better than using like the calculator app, because it's almost like you're seeing the tape of a calculator, in that you can write it and you can see your result, and then you could put the next line, and then if you want to go back and look at the number at top, it's still right there on the top of your notes. So I actually, I haven't started doing this much myself, but this article reminded me that when I want to do calculations, I need to stop thinking of open up the calculator app, and I need to start thinking of actually maybe I'm going to do this in notes, because then I can see my work and I can go back and I can change a variable. And if you change this to this, what does it change the answer? And so this is as much for a reminder for me. Don't forget to use the Notes app for calculations.
That's a good point about the Notes app, because you're right. I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm opening up a calculator. I don't actually use the built-in calculator. I use CalcBot from a company called TapBots that we like quite a bit, because one of the reasons is because it has like a history of my math problems, but sometimes I forget to like save it in the history line, and I have to go back and try to find it or recreate. But I like that idea. I didn't think about that, even that you can even use this on the iPhone as well as even an iPad, so that you can use the notes and you can kind of have a big blank space for all your work. That's really good. At the end of last week, I shed a tear thanks to the fact that you shared an ad right from Apple called Heartstrings. Let me see if I can get this pulled up on this. I have heard many people talk about the fact that it has affected many other people the exact same way. I'll let you tell the story here, but I'm glad that we're coming back to it, because there were several things in that video that I wanted to know about, that we got some answers now, because it affected so many people on this, Jeff. Good stuff.
Yeah.
The video is called Heartstrings. I'll make sure I have another link to it as well.
Yeah, and it's a great video, and it's very touching, because you see the dad who has hearing issues, and so he can't hear his daughter, and then he puts on the AirPods Pro and he can hear her. And as I've just described it, it sounds sort of bland, but if you've watched the commercial, you know that it's a real tearjerker.
You got to see it.
However, when I saw the ad, I just assumed that these were actors in this thing. And I was blown away when I saw a couple articles. The first one that I saw was this article in Men's Health, but then there was also an article in a publication called Ad Age that say that no, Apple actually, they found, I don't know how they find these people. There was this gentleman in Chicago. His name was John Pelletro. Yep. And he was exactly this story, that he's somebody who he knew he had hearing issues. He didn't want to go through the expense of buying a hearing aid, and I think Apple says that 75% of people that have hearing loss don't even consider looking into a hearing aid. And so that's who he is. And then he gets the AirPods Pro and realizes this. I mean, the example that he gave that was funny was when he would watch TV with his wife. He's like, her level is like a 4, but I want the TV volume on a 10. And so we're constantly battling, is that if the TV is loud enough for me, it's too loud for you. And if it's loud enough for you, it's too soft for me. He's like, but now with the AirPods Pro, I can wear them, and my wife and I are all happy because we could just watch TV. So, but anyway, the guy in the commercial is the guy. I mean, this is him. Now, they say that the daughter is an actress. The daughter in the commercial is like a teenager.
The daughter in the commercial, right?
In real life, his daughter is a little bit younger. But when they have the flashbacks to showing the daughter when she was younger in home videos, those are his actual home videos of his actual daughter. So on your screen right now,
incredible.
That's his actual daughter. And they picked out a teenager that sort of looks like her. So I just, again, it made me go back and watch the commercial again. And in fact, I don't think he actually has a line in the commercial.
I was just going to say, he doesn't say a word. He has a tear. You see him tearing up. But he doesn't say anything in the entire ad.
Exactly. And yet he was, it wasn't until I rewatched the ad that I realized that he doesn't have a line, because he is such the
Right.
central character, the emotion that's on his face. And so I just think that's fun, is that they got the real person to do it.
Oh, that's
I
so
have to
cool.
admit, it also made me think that because this is one of those, first of all, this is apparently the first Apple holiday ad. They always come out with nice ads for the
Oh, yeah,
holidays
good
every
ones.
year.
Yeah.
This is the first time they've done one in which accessibility was a feature, which is interesting because
Oh,
Apple, as some of
interesting.
these other
Yeah.
articles have pointed out, accessibility has always been something that Apple's been very aware of. They designed their products from day one with accessibility in mind. So, good on Apple. I wasn't really thinking of it as being an accessibility commercial, but of course it is. Even though it's also a holiday theme. So that was one interesting thing. It also made me think about the fact that, I will probably be thinking about this commercial for years to come. And
Yep.
so this
Same.
this is a rabbit trail. I didn't even tell you about this, Brett, but I put something into our little notes here that you might see. Brett, do you remember a series of commercials many, many years ago? It was back in, I think, 2002, back when Apple was doing the why you would want to use a Macintosh commercial. I think
Well,
this
I'm
was
a
even
Mac and I'm a
before.
PC.
I think it
Yeah,
was even
those. Yeah.
before
Yeah.
that. It was actually
Oh,
before that series. They had hired
what?
this filmmaker, Errol Morris, to have real people come on and talk about the Mac. And one of the commercials featured this person named Ellen Feiss. And if you click on one of the links that I put
Oh,
in the show
Ellen. Oh,
notes,
yeah.
you're going to
Okay.
probably recognize her because she was this
Oh,
teenager
immediately.
that who I'm talking about, that
Yes.
had this look to her. And I just think it's so funny because it's now been 22, 23 years later, and I still remember,
There
there's your
she
picture.
is.
I remember this commercial like yesterday. People
I
who
do
are about my
too.
age, and because she's like, oh, I wrote this term paper and my computer ate it. And it was
Yep.
a really good paper, really, but I had to rewrite it. It wasn't as good. It was just such a cute, relatable commercial, and she just had
Sure.
this look of like this teenager, and it's just funny that somebody who is a real person, apparently she was a friend. Errol Morris was the producer of these commercials, and she was a friend of one of his sons, and so one of these commercials had his son, and another commercial had one of his friends, and she recorded at the end of the day, and she said, I was taking Benadryl all the time, so I look sort of tired and stuff. But it was just a very
Right.
memorable commercial. So I just wanted to mention that I
Oh,
actually
how
typed her into
funny.
Google last night, and it turns out that she's actually, if you click on that link, she's actually a professor, an art history professor
What?
at the Providence
Wait.
University. I have a link there in the show notes. There she goes.
Hey,
So that
that's
she is
Ellen all grown up.
exactly. It's the grown-up version of Ellen Feiss, and so good for her. If you have her class, maybe you would recognize her. So it just made me think, that's where Ellen Feiss is today, all these years later, and it's still a name that I remember and know.
Oh
I,
my
I do
goodness.
wonder if in this future, John Pelletreau, who I think is like an electrician in Chicago, maybe 20 years from now, we'll be saying, "What is John doing today? Is he still listening to his AirPods Pro?"
We
So
can.
anyway, that's my little walk
I
down memory
like
lane.
how her name on this was Providence College is where she is. It's EC, and then Ellen is in parentheses.
Yeah, I
Like
guess she goes by
maybe
EC.
she stopped going by Ellen at some point, because not everybody thought that. Well, there were some other people that thought, because she was on Benadryl. I've heard her interviews about this. She she didn't look like she was fully with everyone.
People thought
In
that
the
she was that she was on drugs at the time, that she had been
right.
smoking pot or something like that, even though she said she wasn't. But anyway.
I know. Oh, that's so fun. Just quickly, when you were talking about the Apple holiday ads, I remember one specifically, to your point, that I don't know how many years ago this was, but it was this kid who seemed like he was on his phone the whole time while the family was obviously around the house.
Yeah.
You know where I'm going, right? And he was like taking photos and stuff, but he was on his phone, and people were like, "Why are you on your phone? Come on, like, here's with the family." And at the end, what he was doing the whole time was making a present for the entire family, right? He had like a bunch of family memories, and everybody was just like, "Thank you." But it's that kind of stuff. Like, dang it, Apple! Like, how do you come up with such great things that are so memorable for so long? It's really good. I like it. Let's switch gears to the Apple Watch. Just a quick little story that you linked to that I have been noticing, and I'm kind of liking the live activities. Like if I'm playing music, or I think you talked about, like, if the Saints are playing in town, when you look at your watch, you don't see your selected watch face, but what you'll see is the live activity of whatever is going on at the time. I feel like I'm still getting used to it a little bit, Jeff, but I kind of like it because we were talking about that again. This is sort of AI, like what's going on that you might be interested in, that the Apple Watch is going to bubble that up for you, as opposed to having you click through or go into a different app. But Not everybody is happy with this. So this article you link to shows you how to turn that off if you don't want it.
Yeah, I do personally like it because so far it is smart, as Apple says, it's a smart stack, is
Right.
that it's going to show something that I'm most interested in, and it's going to be right there on my watch when I glance at it. I haven't traveled since the new version of the watch OS came out. At least I don't think I have. But I would imagine that if I'm using like one of these flight tracking apps, that
Mm-hmm.
because it has one of these
It does.
things,
That's right.
that's what I would see, which again is the most useful information. Perhaps I could open up my watch and it'll instantly tell me what gate I'm walking to without me having to tap anything.
That's
So
right.
I love this
Right.
idea. This is totally useful. And it's not like you can't see the time because as we all know, at the bottom is the stack, but at the top right, it actually has the time in either digital or analog, depending upon what kind of clock you have. So you can still see what time it is. Now, if you wanted to see your Apple Watch face, maybe not because of the time, but because of a complication that you put there,
Right.
you
Something
might find
else.
it annoying that, hey, I don't want to be looking at this live activity. I want to see my normal watch face so that I can look at
Right.
the weather widget I put on there or whatever other widget my reminders widget. So if you don't like this feature, this post describes how you can go and you can turn it off, the auto launch live activities feature. But I would encourage people to at least think about it and keep it on because again, I do find it useful. But it's nice that you can personalize your Apple Watch and have whatever experience you want. Even if you have it turned off, you can always, of course, get to the smart stack just by either turning the digital crown on your Apple Watch or using your
Yeah.
finger
Or
to swipe
flicking
up.
up.
And
Yep.
then
Yep.
you'll see your stacks, and the one at the top will be the one that Apple thinks is most relevant to what you're doing right now. Play and pause if you've got music playing on a home
That's
pod or
right.
something like that. Or so I love what Apple has done here, but I can understand. And don't get me wrong, there actually have been one or two times when I did look at my watch and I'm like, oh, I don't want to be looking at that right now. I want to look
Right.
somewhere else. And in fact, the article suggested that I think he said that he was somebody else in his family was watching TV. He wasn't. And so he looks at his watch and they had the play pause control for what was on his Apple TV. He's like, I'm not even
Oh,
watching the app. I don't want to look at that
right.
right now. So
I don't
that
want
would be an
that. Yeah.
example of perhaps it's trying to do the right thing, but it just doesn't happen to be what you're interested in. So anyway.
From the same setting screen in here, he says that he directs you, and I'll make sure we have a link to this, but you can change which apps are in the smart stack. And I've just barely done that. I've barely changed because there was a couple of them that I'm like, I don't care, I don't use this. But I remember I wanted to add the compass app because when I'm walking around in a big city or something, I just like to make sure that I'm facing the right way when I'm walking.
Makes sense.
So I added that as part of the smart stack. So before you turn it off, maybe just go in and see if you can add something, that might be more useful to your smart stack. So that was watchOS, something that people have liked and other people have not liked in iOS 18.1 so far even, is the Photos app on their iPhone. They didn't like the changes that Apple made with iOS 18. I'm getting used to it. I've kind of liked the direction, but I've also heard some other people that are not happy with it. So good news, in iOS 18.2, Apple is making at least a few changes. This is a story in 9 to 5 Mac from Ryan Christoffel, where he highlights 5 changes that Apple is making to the Photos app that I think should appease some people that were complaining about it.
The one that jumped out at me is the first one he has listed, which is I've absolutely noticed this. If you've got like a little video that you took with my iPhone, for example, and so there's a video there, it used to be that if you're playing the video, when it gets to the end, it stops. And currently, when it gets to the end, it loops and it starts playing it.
Yeah.
And I have actually found it
like
confusing because we're like, wait a minute, is the video still going on? I'm like, oh no, it's restarted. And
Yeah.
I actually don't like that. I prefer
Right.
for when the video ends. If I want to listen, if I want to watch it again, I will hit play and watch it
I'll
again.
hit
But
play.
that's just
Exactly.
me. You may love the looping feature. If you love the looping feature, good for you. If you don't love the looping feature, then in a day or two, when iOS 18.2 comes out, one of the things that will let you do is turn that off, and it will be the very first setting that I change on my iPad and on my iPhone, but that's just me. So anyway, that's turning off something. He has some other minor things here that you can go through and change. Actually, I guess it was the second feature he mentioned. But one thing I didn't even mention in my post, but he also taught that this is a good feature coming up, is apparently you can actually do scrubbing. If you have a long video, you scrub through it.
Yeah.
And he says that you'll be able to do frame by frame video scrubbing, which actually sounds pretty cool.
Okay.
so you can get really at a granular level. It's sort of geeky, but something that I didn't even know was a possibility. And when I saw this in the post, I'm like, oh, that could actually be useful if I want to be very precise about where I end a clip, or see or step through something frame by frame to actually really see what was going on there. So
Right.
that's a cool feature I'm looking forward to. But anyway, as expected, there will be some changes in the Photos app in the next couple of days.
Last week was Black Friday, right? Was that last week? And we went through
It was
several
indeed.
things that I know that we liked, or we were talking about, that were on sale from Amazon because 'tis the season. So I'm glad that today you provided another little
Mhm.
gift wish list here. These specifically, though, in 9 to 5 Mac, are the favorite Find My accessories, which, when I saw the headline at first, Jeff, I'm like, well, okay, just get AirTags, right? And then you'll be fine.
Mm.
But wow, there's a lot more to Find My than just AirTags, so I really enjoyed looking through this little list here. I think what caught my eye was probably even some of the backpacks, and I'm like, oh yeah, there are backpacks that have Find My built in, but there's a lot more in here too. I'll make sure we put a link to the story here from 9 to 5 Mac and Chance Miller. Good list.
Yeah, it's not just Apple that has Find My Stuff. And so this list is a good reminder of that. I think maybe you and I last week talked, or we've certainly talked in the past, Brett, about these thin cards. Like
Yes.
Eufy has one. Other companies
Oh,
have them
that's
too.
right. You have
He
one in
linked to
your,
like the
yeah.
Tupelo one. I have
Uh-huh.
one on my wallet, but I mean, it's not made by Apple, but it works with the Find My ecosystem. And the
Mm-hmm.
other nice thing is that they have different shapes too, because although the AirTags are great, if you want to attach an AirTag to something, you need to buy a case for it, which you can buy on Amazon for like
Right.
$5, a little plastic case. But
Right.
you might want to consider just instead purchasing a third-party accessory that works with Find My, but which has the shape that you want. Maybe it's got like a built-in hole, or it's got some sort of a lock thing that'll attach to a belt, or whatever it is. If there's something that would be perfect for you, consider buying it. And then, of course, as you say, some products have it built in. When Apple first announced Find My support for third parties, I remember they talked about some
Yeah.
high-end brands of bicycles that had like
Oh,
built
yeah, that's
into it.
right.
And so that
Built
way,
in.
like a thief wouldn't even necessarily see, oh, look at this AirTag attached to the bicycle. It would just be part of the bicycle. And
Right.
likewise, you
Right.
mentioned that it could be built into things like luggage, or a backpack or something. So there's lots of alternatives out there. So far for me, the thin one for my wallet is the only one that I've purchased that I can think of. That's a third
Okay.
party Find My
And
item.
you have
But
the Eufy one, right?
I have
Is
the
your
Eufy one,
card?
which works really
Yeah.
well, but I suspect that they all work similar. Yeah.
Very good. Like there's one here called SwitchBot Wallet. And then Chipolo is another company that's been around for a long
Mm-hmm.
time, even doing
Mm-hmm.
this. And I feel like sometimes they have their own proprietary apps that work with it. But the fact that Apple has opened this up and allowed other devices to work with the Find My, to me, is just, I mean, that it certainly is another reason that I might buy something along those lines, as opposed to, just getting something that has its own proprietary app, because I really enjoy having the Find My app everywhere on there. Here in the United States, when we think of Apple campuses, we think of what we call one Cupertino infinite loop, or we think of the spaceship today. But if you are in the United Kingdom, you might think of Battersea, where it's an amazing I don't even know when this building was built. Maybe you linked to the Wikipedia site today,
Mm-hmm.
that it's like one of the largest brick buildings in the entire world, or it was when it was built on the Thames River, because it was a power station. I don't know how long it sat there not being used until Apple has purchased it, and apparently this is like London Apple office space, which looks amazing. And I heard the other day, I was listening to a podcast and somebody was just saying that it's even better looking in person when you go there. But it's such a unique property. This is just so weird that there you can go to the property and stand outside and watch a Wallace and Gromit movie, stop action movie, that was specifically designed to be shown on these two huge smokestacks. I don't know if I'm doing the best job of describing this. I don't even know
Mm-hmm.
if I can describe it. You have to go and look. You did a good job. Apple has its own little page about this that you link to, because you can not only see a picture of it, but you can see a behind the scenes video of how the Wallace and Gromit little short movie was made. I got to tell you, Jeff, my family and I are planning to take a Europe vacation and go to London in the next couple of weeks. And I'm trying to scheme. How can I say, yeah, we might want to see the crown jewels or, go to Buckingham Palace, but can we also go and see Battersea in the Apple Wallace and Gromit movie? Is that something I could do as a family? I don't know, but this is really cool that Apple, just such a unique and innovative idea here.
Make sure that you go between, 5 p.m. and 10:30 to see the videos.
I saw, that's when the showing as.
So, we just, if you just happen to be passing through that area, you're like, oh, how do we end up here in this part of town after 5 o'clock? Oh, that's why. I was looking at the Wikipedia entry. Apparently, the building was finished in 1955.
Thank you.
And they used it until 1980, but then it sat empty for like 30 years, and apparently it was in really bad shape too. And so it had been on the market, nobody bought it, and so then now Apple has it, and they've turned it into this really cool campus. And I've seen the inside of this building before, because when Apple has done some of its presentations, they would have these viewings in this building for people in Europe to go there and watch it. And the inside of it looks really, really cool. But I had never really thought about what the outside looked like until this, where they're shooting the ads up on it. So it's a fun way for Apple to sort of celebrate the holidays with some beloved characters. Of course, it's also interesting that the folks at Aardman Studio created this using iPhones. I mean, it's stop motion video, but you take a frame and then you move it, and you take another frame, and you move it, and it's incredible. So this totally brought me going down memory lane, because there's an app, I'm sure it's still around today, but been around for a long time, called iStopMotion. There's a number of stop motion apps.
I remember that.
But iStopMotion is one. I remember when my son was younger, he would use the iStopMotion app. I think it was on like an old iPad that he was using at the time, and he would take his little Lego characters and some of his other toys, and he would do, it's like the Toy Story movie. He would make little stories, and he would film these things. And when I saw this article last night, it made me go back and pull up one of the videos that he recorded however many years ago, 15 years ago. And it was just so cute, because first of all, I was hearing his voice being a very young voice as opposed to the teenager he is now. And he had like his dinosaur character was interfacing with this other character. And kids don't care that you can have different universes of different types of toys interact with each other. That makes perfect sense, to have a dinosaur talking to a doll, talking to Mr. Potato Head. They all talk to each other. And it was just really cute looking. Now, again, the level of his stop motion does not come close to Wallace and Gromit, but it was cute nonetheless. And this studio, Aardman Studios, they apparently also have an iPhone app that you can create your own stop motion. And so one of the videos they have on here is a how-to, how you can do this, whether you're an adult or a child at heart, and make your own stop motion video. So it's a fun thing on the side of the building, but hey, if it inspires some people to create some more fun stop motion videos, I'm all for it.
So many great things about this. I mean, just hearing you talk about how the building was in disrepair made me think of, I had the opportunity to go to downtown Los Angeles to visit that theater that was in shambles. And, I don't know that Apple gets enough credit for that. Like, these buildings would just probably be demolished and, make way for something else. But the fact that Apple will go in and take the time and the resources, because I remember how they were showing people meticulously repainting every little part of the facade on that theater. And I can just imagine that this Battersea power station is probably going to be something similar. And, just really cool. And not to mention this Wallace and Gromit, it's not just like it's a 16:9 video. Like, it's made to fit specifically on these two huge smokestacks. And if people are watching the video, you can see the picture there. And I just think that's really cool. Good on you, Apple, for doing something like that. Merry Christmas on there.
Indeed.
Happy holidays and everything else. In the know.
I
this past week went to I was in Chicago for some meetings, and as everyone is prone to do, I needed to get on the Wi-Fi network in this office. So I asked somebody that, hey, can I get the password? And most people know today that if I was trying to log into my Mac, they have their iPhone connected, and it could automatically offer to share the password with someone that's trying to get on the Wi-Fi network. That didn't actually work. So the person came over and they pulled up their Wi-Fi settings on their iPhone, Jeff. And if you tap into a known Wi-Fi network, I feel like I knew this, but I didn't remember it quite right. But if you tap the little I next to one of your iPhone Wi-Fi networks, it will now show you there is a password associated with it. Now, this is, I remember when Apple, now that I, recall this, I remember when Apple put this in because we didn't used to be able to see the password at all. But now you go into a known Wi-Fi network and you'll see password. Now, by
Oh
default,
yeah,
it's
look at
all
that. Huh.
dotted out on there, right? See, it's dotted out so you can't see it. But if you tap on it, it will authenticate through Face ID, and then it'll show you the password, and then will also give you the ability to copy the password. So in other words,
Very,
what
very
this person
cool. I
did
did not know this.
is
Huh.
they copied that for me, and then they just, I think they through Slack or text message, they were able to send the password, so I could get on in this this office. I know, I feel like maybe just because in the past we knew we didn't have the password and that was very secure, but it is still secure because the only way you can actually see the password is if you authenticate with Face ID. The other thing in this Apple article that I'm showing here is that if you go to your list of Wi-Fi networks, in the upper right corner there's edit, and if you tap on edit, again you have to do Face ID, but it'll show you the known networks, and again for each of those known networks there is a little eye that you can tap on, and if you do that it will actually show you where you can see the password. The same kind of an idea, like you just tap that little eye for the info and it'll show you in there. And the last thing quickly on this, while I would probably go to the Wi-Fi settings section and look all that up, now with iOS 18 and the Passwords app, Jeff, one of the things, because I don't use the Passwords app. I know you and I are big 1Password fans, but in the Passwords app, if you go to the Passwords app, there is a little tile there called Wi-Fi. And if you tap on that, it'll show you that same list of all of the known Wi-Fi networks that you have connected to. And you have the ability then there as well to be able to see the password or copy the password if you needed to. So I just wanted to make sure people were aware of that, because the one thing that didn't work quickly is, I'm trying to remember, like if you connect to a Wi-Fi network that doesn't have a password, you're not going to see the password option there. And it seemed like one of the devices connected to a Wi-Fi network where it was shared with me automatically, and I didn't see the password. In other words, I don't know if that was another security layer or not, but it seemed like in one of those known networks where I didn't type in the password, I couldn't see the password on there. I hope some of that makes sense. But I'm just saying that in some cases, I found the password wasn't available. But if it's like your office Wi-Fi network or your home Wi-Fi network, you can go in and you can actually see the password, which makes sense. You may not need to know that because you already know the password. But if you wanted to copy it or you wanted to remind yourself what it was and send it to somebody, that's an easy way to do that as well.
Okay, this is cool. I didn't know any of this stuff. I see from the article that you're showing that this has been out since iOS 16, so this is over 2 years old. I had no idea. And then you mentioned the thing that if you tap at the top, that edit button, and you can see the prior Wi-Fi networks. I'm looking at it on my phone, and I tell you, Brett, I'm getting nostalgic. It's a little bit of a walk down memory lane. I mean, there are hotels that I haven't visited since I was on vacation years ago.
Right.
I mean, it's giving me the password that I used when I once connected to my iPhone 6S, which was that came out in 2015.
Okay.
So it's got at least 9 years or 8 or 9 years. So it's
so
a
funny.
lot. I see other law firms that I've gone to for depositions, and I've used their Wi-Fi.
Right.
This is an interesting walk down memory lane. So
you can delete them there too, by the way, right?
I guess I could
on the left. You have that. Don't do that because you can. but if you know you're not going back to that place, or you just wanted to clean that up, I mean, they have the little delete icon on the left there if you wanted to delete those. But yeah, I didn't know that I had the whole list on there either, and so that was kind of cool. I think I had recently done a reset my network settings. If that makes sense, you can go into the general and you can reset instead of reset the entire phone. You can just reset your network settings, which basically clears out all of your known networks and everything. So I don't have quite that history. So I'm just warning that if you reset your network settings, Jeff, you won't probably see all of those on there. Most people don't need to do that. It was just something that I was doing because I was switching back and forth between a VPN or something else like that. So I was trying out some other things. But I'm just warning you that if you do reset your network settings, you may erase those known networks there.
Yeah. On the other hand, this iPhone that I'm using right now, is one that I set up from scratch. I did not use Migration Assistant to move
Oh,
over. And so
interesting.
now obviously I connected to my iCloud, so it brought my personal data that way.
Right.
But I just mentioned that it was just through the stuff that it knows about me through iCloud, it downloaded all of those old Wi-Fi networks to my phone. So that's interesting. So
Nice.
that's a great tip. I had never heard about any of that. It's always interesting to learn something new. The tip that I have this week, so I'm giving, attorneys have to have education every year. It's continuing education, CLE. I'm teaching a
Yeah.
CLE this upcoming week. It's part of a program. It's a little bit of a pretentious name, Masters of the Courtroom. Brett, I suppose that means that I'm
Ooh.
a master of the
Wow.
courtroom.
Okay.
But the presentation that I'm giving, since I'm an appellate attorney, is on brief writing tips, and I am so looking
Oh,
forward to this
okay.
presentation. If anyone's in the New Orleans area, come see us on
Ooh, I
Thursday
want to
morning.
go.
We're the very
Yeah.
first one. So I have hundreds of tips about how to be a better writer, which things, and it's not just me, it's also like a federal magistrate judge and a Supreme Court justice, and we have a great panel. Anyway, of the many tips that I
Lovely.
have, many of them are actually related to technology. That won't surprise you. And one that I just wanted to mention, because I use this all the time as a lawyer when I write briefs, but any type of writing that you do that's, more than just writing a short little paragraph for an email, if it's something like you're turning in something or writing a letter, here's my tip. You should, of course, you need to write something, and then you later want to go back and revise it and edit it to, make it better and make it tighter and stuff like that. There's a famous statement from Mark Twain that, this letter would have been shorter if I had more time. The idea is it actually takes more time to write something that's shorter because you're editing it and you're making it more concise and stuff like that. But here is my tip is, if you go back to edit something that you've written in the past, I find it really helpful for me to revise it using a different medium than the format that you used when you created it. When I type things, I'm 99% of the time using Microsoft Word on my PC or sometimes my Mac, but the interface is basically the same. It's a computer setup, right? And so a lot of people will go back and just reread things that they've written to edit them on that same computer. And I understand that. What I encourage you to do is break out of the mold. What I personally love to do is make a PDF and then send that to my iPad, especially my iPad Pro with the big screen. And that way I can sort of lean back in my chair with my iPad and read the brief. And I find that just looking at it visually on the iPad screen, and again, you could do the same thing by printing it out and by looking at the paper, as opposed to reading it in that word processing program where I wrote it, it just gives me a different perspective. Ideally, you would want to have an editor that would edit your work, someone who's fresh to it and can see things you didn't see. And that's nice to do as well. But when you're editing your own work, just using a different medium, I find I catch typos that I didn't catch or the spell check didn't catch. I look at my sentences differently and I think, oh, I could say this more efficiently. It's just something about using it differently. And again, the number one way to do that is if you have an iPad and you print a PDF and look at it there, or you could actually use other modes too. It's just a great way to do it. A secondary thing, and this is not as good for a super, super long piece of writing, but for something shorter, I will, even if I draft it in Microsoft Word on my computer, I will open it using Microsoft Word on my iPhone or even my iPad. And there's a view in the Word app called Mobile View, which it strips out all the formatting. It just shows you the words and you can make the text bigger or smaller. So you're not concerned about things like page breaks and stuff like that. You're just looking at the words, but because you're looking at the words in a different format, I find that you will catch things, just like I said before, you'll catch mistakes, you'll think of new ways to draft things. So anyway, that is my tip, is to use your devices, your iPhone and your iPad, to reread your writing, and I think you'll get a different perspective.
I use this in a similar way, Jeff, that if I'm writing a blog post or an article, a magazine article or something like that, that I will draft it, maybe even in something like notes. And sometimes I even just even will dictate like a first draft in Apple, my iPhone in notes, but then I'll copy that the next day. I'll copy that into like Microsoft Word on my computer or in my iPad. So it's a similar kind of an idea like
Same
that, because
idea, yeah.
I know that I can get some ideas out, and just using a different medium, like you said, or, a different perspective. Like, I think even subconsciously, we don't realize how much that can be helpful, and that works as an editor. So anyway, great tips on that. Whether you use Microsoft Word or Notes, or frankly any of the other writing, there's just dozens and dozens of excellent writing apps, even available for not just the Mac or even Windows or the iPhone or the iPad. That's a great tip. Thank you. And man, good luck on your CLE. That sounds fun.
Thanks.
master.
I'm looking
of
forward
the
to it. It's going to be
courtroom.
great.
That's great. All right. Well, great talking with you again, Jeff, as always. Lots of good stuff already leading up into the holiday season there. But we are going to be around at least for one more Friday, maybe a little bit more. We'll provide more details as we get into the holiday season, as we are prone to do. But regardless of all of that, we will talk with you next week. Thanks, Jeff.
See you next week, Brett. Bye-bye, everybody.